Good morning. It's a crisp fall day here in Wisconsin, and I'm here to talk today about Byzantine Christianity. Lots of reading. Stick with it. It will reward your efforts in learning. Let's start with Cameron, the book, Byzantine Christianity, A Very Brief History. There it is, with the Empress Theodora on the cover. So we'll start there. Just blaze our way through the chapters. Take a look at the chronology on pages XV to XVI. That's 15 to 16 in Roman numerals. It gives you a sense of the span that we're talking about here. Byzantine Christianity tends to get ignored in many history of Christianity courses, and I think that's unfortunate. Not only because I love the city of Istanbul and Anatolia, formerly known as Asia Minor, the country of Turkey, where I've done a lot of my research over the last 10 years, but because it's really where Christianity endured during these years. It's not that it wasn't present in Europe, it's just that clearly it was a center, along with, of course, Latin Christianity that then spread up north into Europe. Hagia Sophia is a great example of that, built in 537. CE and still there, a remarkable sacred space. And it is sacred space, that's the theme in many ways throughout our readings on Byzantine Christianity. We're talking about space-centered Christianity in very many ways, and we'll get into some of those details as we move forward. But along with that emphasis on space, of course, is an emphasis on the emperor. And imperial Christianity is really what marks the Byzantine period. That is, no separation between church and state, emperor and patriarch. Although there would often be tensions, they also worked in tandem. From the time of Constantine, who of course established Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire. Byzantines didn't think of themselves as Byzantines, they thought of themselves as Romans. And very clearly as Christians from the time of Constantine down to 1453. And of course, there are still Christians who endure, including the Patriarch of Istanbul, who continues to live in that city down to today. If you take a look at chapter 2, some of the doctrinal debates come up for discussion. And Cameron puts it well, all sides involved in these painful divisions saw themselves as orthodox and the others as mistaken. That's on page 6. It's important to remember that, as is also important to that's on page 6. Also important to remember on page 15, bishops now became members of an elite. And that association between the elite and the emperor and in Christianity very much endured and was a key part of Byzantine Christianity. Chapter 3, the Age of the Fathers, Basil, Gregory of Nazianzus, and John Chrysostom, along with John of Damascus and Maximus the Confessor. Page 21, contrition, repentance, inwardness, and the centrality of quietness and prayer central to Byzantine life. And we'll see this especially when we get to the chapters on lay piety and practice. Note also the persistence of anathemas, that is curses against Jews, and after the 7th century against Muslims that emerge in association with Byzantine Christianity. Closely related to the lay and pagan practice of taking oaths, that is the importance of the power of words and of language, absolutely crucial during this time period and within Byzantine Christianity, in contrast to what was going on in some ways in European and Latin Christianity. The Eastern Church suffered its splits, and Justinian from 527 to 565 rebuilt Hagia Sophia, and the Empress Theodora gave us a legacy down to today in canon law. Justinian himself was a theologian. And you begin to see, though, linguistic differences arise, Greek, Syriac, Latin, Coptic, along with the theological differences that McCulloch traces very nicely for us between the Miaphysite and the Diophysite, that is, between the non-Chalcedonians and the Chalcedonian Christians. So, but doctrine wasn't really the heart of it. it was spirituality and especially the role of icons and the disputes over the role of icons. Empress Theodora restored the images in contrast to the critique of icons as idolatry. There is that second commandment after all. But I thought Cameron did a nice job tracking how the role of images had to do with the place of matter in the divine economy, and an emphasis within Orthodoxy down to today that plays down Plato's dualism between body and soul, matter and spirit, and really tries to seek a holistic integration of those two. I love the quote on page 37 saying that according to the iconophiles, that is those who love the icons, pictures are superior to words. And if we consider that and its implications for spirituality, Christians might do things very differently than we do in ordinary liturgical practice, especially. So after iconoclasm, you see what's called the Phocian schism. This is in chapter 6. Photius fought against Pope Nicholas I and actually excommunicated him. And the big issue here was the filioque, that is, and the son. That simple little phrase inserted into the creed led to huge divisions and to debates down to today. Byzantium, according to Cameron, was a commonwealth of nations. That is, a lot of different peoples represented there, including after 988 the Rus, centered in Kiev. Chapter 7, Macedonian emperors, really the high point in many ways of the Byzantine Empire from roughly 867 down to the 1050s. And you see the presence of some significant empresses, Zoe and another Theodora, and then the emergence during this time period of the Great Schism, which was in 1054 between Cardinal Humbert, sent from Rome, the papal legate, who lays a bull of excommunication on the altar during the liturgy at Hagia Sophia. It's an astonishing act of hubris and assertion of Roman primacy over and against Michael Cerularius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, who, of course, did not take kindly to that liturgical transgression. Chapters 8, 9 flow into the Sack of Constantinople in 1204. Now, recognize this is long after the founding of Islam. But it was not Muslims who sacked Constantinople in 1204, it was Latin Christians. So you see here the fruition of competing imperial Christianities, the one centered in Rome, and actually it was the Venetians who carried out the sack, and those in Constantinople. And it was not only the question of orthodoxy that was at stake. Of course, it was also riches and wealth and land, because after the sack of Constantinople, relics and images were taken back to Venice, to the treasury of San Marco, where I hope to visit them in a couple of weeks when I'm there. And just lots of spiritual and material resources taken from Constantinople by Latin Christians after that sacking. It's not like the empire died then. It endured, in fact, until 1453, including the period when Michael Palaiologos brought the Byzantine Empire back to Constantinople. It had been in exile in Nicaea while the Venetians ruled. And that was in 1261. And it's interesting that there were various efforts to unite Christians. Imagine that. All of them failed. And so you have this enduring split between the Orthodox, what became the Orthodox in the East, Greece, Asia Minor, Armenia, Syria, and so forth, on up into the Balkans and then over to Russia, and the Latin West that endures down to today. And plenty of consequences that follow from that, and plenty of causes for that schism on both sides. Under Paleologus in the 13th century, you saw a highly literate and learned society. This is page 76, that prized scholarship and classical learning. You could say that you see here a precursor of the European Renaissance in some way, and it wouldn't be too far to say that you could see that influence going back to Italy, where the Renaissance, of course, flourished in the 15th century. But it all came to a crashing halt under Mehmed II, the siege and conquest of Constantinople in 1453, 29 May, that ended the Christian regime in Constantinople, now Istanbul, and brought the Byzantine Empire to an end, although, again, vestiges of it certainly continue in Orthodoxy. So talk about the legacies of the Byzantines down to today. That's what I asked you to write about. So I'll move through this fairly quickly. Obviously, you have the material legacy, churches, many of them now museums. If you go to Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, don't encourage you to go there now, but someday, God willing, the current regime will end and things will become more open again. It's an amazing place. And lots of Christian vestiges dot Turkey, Anatolia, and Constantinople as well. The history of icons and the practices in relationship to icons and relics. So again, you see here this integration of the material and the spiritual, and the attempt on the part of the theologians to emphasize that there is no separation between the spiritual and the material, but in fact everything is given to us from God, returns to God, and therefore is worthy of veneration. And it is veneration of the icons that is the classic practice, not worship, lest we fall into the trap of somehow valuing words as less idolatrous than images or icons, if you follow that track of reasoning. That's certainly the track that was predominant within the Byzantine Empire. And relics go along with that. Also, Luther didn't have much good to say about these, but the fact of the matter is they materialize the spiritual and give believers something to hold on to. Flourishing of religious objects, amulets, charms, tokens, shrines. As well, the shrine of Thekla in southern Turkey became a pilgrimage site. We've seen Thekla before, and certainly worthy of remembering her. Liturgical objects, communion vessels, decorated book covers, all of these are passed down to us as material legacies from the Byzantine Empire. Along with that goes an emphasis, chapter 13, on discipline and control. There were many variations of worship and theology flourishing under the Byzantines, but we can see very clearly efforts to suppress and assert control over this diversity. Page 99, the idea that there must be one officially approved version of Christianity was fundamental to Byzantine Christianity. That emphasis on unity and the willingness to exercise control to maintain it is crucial. But page 102, note also that in everyday life, especially the practice of oikonomia, discretion in imitation of God's mercy, balance this rigorism and this tendency to repress and control diversity, and especially through the use of anathema and the accusation of heresy. So the emergence of Orthodoxy after 1254, and or after 1453. Sorry, where did that come from? There was no longer a Christian emperor, and the theoretical balance in Byzantium, however imperfect, between emperor and patriarch, state and church was broken. That unity, of course, has died a long and hard death, and in many ways has resurfaced under the current backlash, where you see, especially in Russia, Vladimir Putin claiming the mantle of orthodoxy to legitimize his tyrannical regime. There are many examples of this around the globe today, attempting to renew this integration of empire with Christianity, including, of course, here in the United States in many and various fashions. See here my book, Empire of Sacrifice, The Religious Origins of American Violence, if you want to see what I think about that development. But the legacy isn't only this political imperial Christianity. It's also an incredibly rich legacy of worship and theology. The doctrine of theosis, the idea that God became a human so that humans can become divine, is central and put into practice through a liturgy of participation. You see this less in the high mass of Orthodoxy than you do in the Holy Liturgy, than you do in the street processions, and we'll turn to those shortly. But recognize that the presence of unaccompanied chanting and singing, the use of incense, all of the senses involved in worship, sight, hearing, smell, and kissing icons as well, I suppose, taste, is part of it, and of course the Eucharist. So just recognize the profound influence of the Byzantine Christianity on down to today. Let's turn then from the sort of top-down view that Averil Cameron gives us, and he admits she's doing as much, to the popular People's History of Christianity. There it is. And the 3 chapters that were required for you to take in this week. The first one by Krieger is pretty quick, straightforward, summarizes a lot of Cameron. You can move through it fairly quickly. Key point, Byzantines performed their piety in public processions from the emperor down to lay people. There was a common system, a shared system focused on healing shrines, monastic life, and the veneration of icons. Maxwell's chapter is just great. She does an awesome job pointing to how John Chrysostom's sermons, this remarkable preacher, through what he was trying to negate or trying to change, recognizing he probably wasn't going to, indicates some of the things that were going on among lay people, and what she suggests is an alternative piety to the kind of moralizing piety that Chrysostom associated with Christianity and tried to impose. So church attendance. Chrysostom struggled to get people to church when there were chariot races and satanic spectacles taking place over in the Hippodrome. Certainly sounds familiar to me. In Green Bay this coming Sunday, it's a 12 noon game at Lambeau Field, and there will be many of our parishioners who will be in the parking lot tailgating at 10 a.m. Instead of worshiping, and this is a recognized fact, and you can preach about it all you want, and it is an ongoing struggle. But people did show up in times of crisis, and especially during holy days, that is Lent, and during the Feast of the Nativity as well. Chrysostom, through what he emphasized in terms of good behavior, also helps us to recognize some things that were happening among Christians, as well as things that might not be happening with regularity. Meal prayers, but not when you're drunk, and psalms while working, and then almsgiving, which had the helpful effect of averting demons. And a lot of these practices, Chrysostom clearly drew upon and employed the fear of demonic possession as a way to emphasize holy practice as an alternative and as a way to avoid trouble. Worth considering, given that we can be very easily possessed by our possessions, as I put it in my book on sacred space. So a prayer at meal, page 201, take a look at it, see what you think. It's in the little sidebar. This is one of Chrysostom's prayers. Be curious to see in one of the museums we'll be visiting these miniature gospels that women wore around their necks. There's a picture of an amulet on page 204. Take a look at that and read what that's about, and recognize As well, I think it's important, Maxwell points out that among lay people in particular, there was kind of a rigorous notion of purity that Chrysostom sought to preach against or to transform in some way. That is communicating the gospel that freed people from their obsessions with purity as well, as purity so called, which is, yeah, anyway, another topic that would be fascinating to get into by way of conversation theologically and historically as well. And here, where I go into that most, if you're interested in hearing what I think about it, is in my book on youth ministry in modern America, where I contrast youth ministries that engage young people in practices as opposed to those that try to keep them pure, that is, away from the world in some way. Breaking bad habits, the second section of this chapter. Pretty clear conflict Maxwell sees between the preacher's moralizing and people's common sense. That's on page 207. You see a lot of this today as well, especially in evangelical churches who are always preaching against, no, 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 which is probably a pretty clear way of communicating that people are saying yes, 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 an awful lot. Jeremiads tend to rebound and actually make more attractive the object of the preacher's moralizing in lots of ways. Chrysostom thought there were problematic celebrations going on among the Byzantines. New Year celebrations were particularly prone to trouble, along with weddings and some of the practices associated with weddings. And you see some of Chrysostom's sexism coming through here, as you do throughout the chapter, his anti-Jewish preaching, those anathemas, and just a deep suspicion of Jewish practice comes through clearly in his writings in a way that has had a profound and terrifying legacy in Jewish-Christian relations. It's the same thing true of funerals as well. Just wants to avoid, any sort of taint of Jewish practices among Byzantine Christians, which leads you to suggest that, in fact, there were lots of carryovers from, as Christians observed, Jews in Alexandria and other cosmopolitan cities and their practices, and carried on with them, along with the pagan practices and the carryovers as well. The Skedros, then, also an awesome chapter, I thought, just absolutely great. Tracing through the public celebrations that dotted the Byzantine Empire, 78 full religious holidays over the course of a year, 78 days off. Think of that. Days to participate in the festivals that dotted life in Constantinople and throughout the Byzantine Empire. And then 28 half days off as well. So recognize that this is well before the Puritan ethic had kicked in, and we're dealing with processions that on the Feast of the Nativity, for instance, made 11 stops between the Imperial Palace and Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. 11 different stops for chanting and prayer and singing, and long procession of priests and holy objects and censers. So again, use your imagination to visualize what was taking place in these public demonstrations and rituals. Something like a 4th of July parade, only dedicated to Jesus. The shrines, then, a big part of the chapter focuses on the shrines. Skedros has written a book about St. Demetrios in Thessalonica, focuses on that especially, not surprisingly. That's how we do things as scholars. But I just thought it was great, pointing out how Artemios, the shrine of Artemios in Constantinople, was for healing male genitalia and hernias. Especially beneficial to go there for a vigil in which you would burn a wood of oil lamp, and then with the residue used for a healing salve. If you want to know where salvation came from, that would be it. This idea of salve, this healing. Again, no separation between the material and the spiritual in Byzantine Christianity. In his discussion of Saint Demetrius in Thessalonica, the idea of incubation in a sacred space, that is, you go there to sleep, which then leads to healing, especially through dreams, central notion within Byzantine spirituality. And if you think that's absent from the West, think of Dr. King's I Have a Dream message and the role of dreams more broadly within the African American community down to today. It's a significant aspect or metaphor and reality within the practice of Christianity that doesn't often get talked about, and yet it's there. Cyrus and John and St. Minas in Alexandria, again, incubation and bathing as part of a visit to a sacred space, and of course, veneration of relics of this 4th century martyr St. Minas. Central place, really crucial, and just this whole network of pilgrimages in the Byzantine Empire, crucial to understand. And that takes us into the souvenirs or the eulogiae, the blessings that people bring back from their pilgrimage process, these receptacles of divine energy. Whenever you go to a sacred place, you bring some of it back with you because that receptacle carries or contains the divine energy. We certainly see this practiced in many and various forms down to today. Not all of them connected to Christianity, but certainly Christians can and do memorialize their visit to a sacred place and bring something back that they hope also is a blessing as well. Festivals, the panegyris, the celebration of saints' days, huge street processions and festivals, feasting. Again, Saint Thecla comes in for special mention as a very important figure in the Byzantine world. All right, that's probably more than enough, 25 minutes, going on 26 here. Take a look at the article on Egeria and her pilgrimage from Spain, that is from the west, down through the Holy Land, onto Constantinople as well. A remarkable travel log of her journeys. Again, the voice of a woman from early Christianity, largely been suppressed, and yet you can hear quite clearly her distinct personality and voice emerging from her accounts and back to her sisters in Spain. So take a look at that. And again, the significance, the legacies of this branch of Christian practice and this era of Christian continuity from Constantine down to 1453 is absolutely crucial for understanding, with lots and lots of implications for the practice of ministry and public leadership down to today. Thanks for hanging with me here. Week 6 is a big week, lots of reading. I hope it rewards you, however, I believe it will. And next week's reading week. So if you've fallen behind, which some of you have, get caught up ASAP. Because right after reading week, we come back and the first summative paper is due as well. Take a look at the syllabus for the particular topic. But it's a little deeper dive into this period of Christianity, and we'll have to read the rest of McCulloch up as assigned in order to write that paper. All right, enough. Thank you, and I hope you're going to have a joyous weekend of worship. And please don't hesitate to be in touch. Again, email is the best way to get a hold of me. As I said, I'm going to Spain and Italy for 2 weeks in about a week. So I'm trying to get a little ahead here, but that'll be during reading week. And then the week after, I'll get back to read those papers. You'll see me then. Until then, peace.